Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. Today Tony and I are back to discuss the next part of our 20 for 20 series. Today we're talking about freshman pass rushers, which one we think is going to excel the most for the Crimson Tide. Typically you have these young guys come in and they play a small role, which we kind of saw with maybe Barmore last year, who not a true freshman, but he did have a great season as a young guy. And this season I'll just sort of jump right into it. I think the obvious choice has got to be Will Anderson, the number 22 prospect overall. And before I get into his numbers, Tony, were you surprised that I went with that name, or that kind of what you expected?
No, that's a strong pick. I mean, he's the highest rated of the defensive lineman that Alabama's bringing in, and I think he's kind of the name that when we talked about players that we really wanted to see this spring, he was the defensive side of the ball, the guy that really jumped out for me in terms of just I wanted to see this guy come in. He's a guy that kind of has drawn some comparisons I've heard to Tim Williams, and just in terms of that ability to just get to the quarterback. It's really exciting guy, and a guy that I think could make an instant impact for Alabama.
Yeah, and when you're getting compared to Tim Williams, as far as pass rushing goes, you know that you're in a good spot. I mean, just to get into some of the numbers, 22 sacks last year. And I know it's high school. I know it's, the numbers aren't always going to translate the same, but for anyone to get 22 sacks, like that's an insane number.
Yeah, and I mean, he was on if I remember right, he was on a really strong defense as well. It held their opponents to like some really low number of points per game. So he's just his production level in high school is great. He performed really well, on the camp circuit, and that's why you really saw his name just kind of skyrocket the closer it got to signing day. And he was really one of those guys that once people really got to see, they really saw that talent. So, like I said before, in terms of excitement, this guy brings it.
Yeah, and you mentioned, you kind of mentioned that defense. Their opponents average 7.7 points. I'm kind of surprised it's that high if he's got 22 sacks. I don't know what the situation is with everybody else, but I got to imagine that opponents were working for those seven points a game. He's 6'4", he's 230 pounds. He's not a guy I want to see coming anywhere near me if I'm a quarterback. That's for sure.
No, definitely.
So Tony, I know that you had another name that sort of jumped to your mind first. Who are you sort of thinking of for this role, this freshman pass rushing role next year?
Yeah, definitely. I think the next name that you would look at is Drew Sanders, at least for me. He was a 4-star by Rivals, but he's a high 4-star guy, and I personally think he's kind of the 5-star talent when you look at it. He's a guy that played both sides of the ball in high school, super athletic guy. I think could really fill that, either the Sam or the Jack role. I really like his athleticism. I mean, look, he's a guy that scored 58 offensive touchdowns in high school. Mm-hmm. He's also, like Anderson, can get to the quarterback. You would think being a tight end, in high school as well as an outside linebacker, his coverage skills. I mean, his hands are there. His hands are there, so he might be a little bit more a versatile guy, maybe better in coverage. But when we're talking about him and we're talking about Anderson, two guys I think that could instantly serve in a pass rushing role. We're talking about guys that could come in on third downs and special formations that could really be an impact player for Alabama from the start.
Yeah, and so you sort of touched around it already. What is sort of the path to playing time for these guys, and how much do you see? Are these guys going to be coming in on only third down situations, or do you think there's a chance these guys are playing a larger role, or even as freshmen?
Well, you look at the measurables, right? And they're 6'5", 230. That seems to be a good weight. Maybe they could put on a little bit more pounds, but they're there in that aspect. There's openings at both spots, because you look at Terrell Lewis and Anthony Jennings, the two leaders in pass rushing, are from the outside linebacker position. That's kind of what we're talking about here. They're both gone, so there's openings. We talked about before in this series. We've talked about Christopher Allen. I think is going to come in and be an impact player, a kind of a breakthrough guy coming in from his redshirt junior year. You also got King Makuta, who kind of showed promise during practice last year, but those are still openings, and these are 4-
Yeah.
and 5-star guys that are totally capable of taking roles. So they're going to fight. The competition at the outside linebacker position, both of them. Now, do I expect Alabama to start 2 true freshmen at outside linebacker? No, I don't. But one of these guys could fill a role, and you never know what's going to happen. Look, last year we saw 2 freshmen start at inside linebacker. I think, injuries could happen, but also, just like I said before, special packages where you can involve these guys as pass rushers, they could really see the field a lot in their first year.
Yeah, and I think that's the floor for these guys in terms of how involved they are. That Alabama is going to bring in, on third down especially, but in other situational circumstances, Alabama is going to rotate these linebackers on and off the field. They're going to want to keep guys fresh, and they're also going to want to rotate these guys in, these guys that maybe don't have as much of the defense down. They're just going to want to put them in and say, go get the quarterback. And these are guys that I think have proven at the high school level they can go get the quarterback.
Yeah, I'd like to throw in Chris Broswell, a 5-star guy as well, a guy that could come in. I think Quamdarrius Robinson's another guy that could come in. And then, this next guy is an inside linebacker, Demouy Kennedy out of Mobile. He's an inside linebacker, but he also has the ability to play outside. And so depending on, where he comes in, he's a guy that could be a pass rusher, kind of more of a versatile guy than the 2 of them. But if we're talking about maybe someone that could come in and do some pass rushing and also play in coverage situations, maybe Demouy Kennedy would be better in those situations. So there's a lot of talent. I mean, Alabama, the biggest position they addressed in this recruiting class was the pass rusher, was those guys that could really get to the quarterback, and they hit a home run. I mean, we're talking about, 4 or 5 guys that I think are just going to be, potential All-American talents. And Alabama was able to add that to their roster. So I don't necessarily think we're going to see all of them this year, but, over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, this is definitely a recruiting class to get really excited about.
Yeah, and I don't think many people would know this, but Xavier Dixon led Alabama as a linebacker in sacks with 9 sacks in 2014. And then after that, it's been, these defensive linemen have kind of come in and dominated that role as kind of the guy that gets you a sack. I mean, can one of these linebackers sort of be that guy for Alabama next year? Or is it going to keep being these defensive linemen?
Yeah, that's an interesting stat. Of course, I think Avery Jennings led him in sacks last year, but then the years leading from that to Dixon's year, it's been a defensive lineman. It's been Allen. It's been, Raekwon Davis for a year, and then it was Isaiah Buggs. So it is kind of weird that, Alabama's, generally relied on that defensive lineman to get the sacks. I think with this class, you might see a change in that because there's just so much talent. I know when you look at a guy like Christian Barmore, he showed a lot of his pass rushing, ability last year. It would be kind of maybe if I was picking a leader in sacks, I might pick Christian Barmore just because he just really showed that raw potential. But down the line, man, I think one of these guys will eventually lead Alabama in sacks in one of these years, maybe multiple years, or maybe multiple guys in different years leading them in sacks. I think you're going to get the type of, pass rushing that you saw from elite players at the outside linebacker, like Terrell Lewis, like Tim Williams, like Ryan Anderson. You're going to get that from this bunch.
Yeah, it's certainly weird to think about that there was that 4-year gap between Dixon and Jennings when linebackers weren't leading the team. Because when I think back on those past years, when I think of pass rushers, I think of Ryan Anderson, I think of Tim Williams. I'm thinking of all these linebackers.
And it was close in some years. I mean, I think Christian Miller was second last year, and he didn't play in the final game. So who's to say maybe he. Hey, maybe he sacks Trevor Lawrence a few times and Alabama gets some stops and maybe that game turns around. But they've had their fair share of pass rushers at the outside linebacker position, but they've also had a lot of really good defensive linemen. I mean, look at Jonathan Allen. He's one of the best players in general in Alabama history. So I think the key this season will be to kind of increase that pressure and maybe not just put it all on one position because, we've talked about this before, but Alabama has a really young secondary. So they're going to need some of these guys in the pass rush to provide more pressure to get quarterbacks to make some mistakes. Fortunately, like we said, they've got a ton of talent to do it, not just in these young guys that we're mentioning, but also King Makuta, Christopher Allen, Jerez Parks, those kind of guys sprinkled in. But I think there's definitely a really good mix at pass rusher. There might not be experience as much, but when you look at talent, I think Alabama has a ton to work with.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, remind me how many sacks is Alabama losing from last year's team?
I think it's like the 14 sacks, and I think 24 tackles for a loss. Oh, I don't know. That's just between the two. That's just between Lewis
which is
and
obviously
Jennings. They're losing more than that. I have to go back and look because I think even Xavier McKinney got some of those tackles for a loss, and I think he got a few sacks as well. So, yeah, I mean, you're always going to lose some sack production from the year before. It's just they're hit so much at that position, like at the outside linebacker position, and it's such a rare mix of losing that much, but also they were able to bring in the talent necessary. So there might be a learning curve, but like I keep on saying, there's that talent to work with, and I think that's really the most important thing when you look at it.
Yeah, so just and just looking at the top guys, 14 sacks. They had 26 additional quarterback hits, 77 total hurries. Just between those top, I think 3 guys. I think my numbers have Raekwon just kind of in the mix. He had some hurries, even though he never really quite got home.
Right.
Are you concerned? How would you say? Obviously a lot of talent coming in, a lot of production going out. Would you say Alabama's in a better spot this year, worse, the same? How do you sort of feel about from a pass rushing standpoint?
It's hard to say better when you're losing guys like Anthony Jennings and Terrell Lewis. But I don't think they're losing anything in talent. I just think they're losing anything in, maybe established talent. And it's kind of weird because you look at a guy like Terrell Lewis. He's a guy that brought it some games, but then didn't always seem like he was at 100 all the time. And so maybe, if one of these young guys can hit it from the start, maybe you can see more consistency. And, I'm really excited to see what some of the guys that, like a Chris Allen or like a King Makuta, I'm really excited to see what they're going to bring as well. And I think that mix of people that are on the cusp of breaking out and then just new guys coming into the program, there's a lot of new blood. I think that will, really cause players to have to prove themselves. And there's nobody on this bunch that can rest on their laurels. And I think that's kind of interesting when you look at it, because everyone's going to be out to prove themselves. You're going to get, and I think one of them's bound to have a monster year.
Yeah, I agree. I actually, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I actually think Alabama might be better from a pass rushing standpoint this year. It is crazy to say with a guy like Terrell Lewis and then Jennings gone. It's crazy to think that, but I think when you have this many young guys coming in that are hungry, and then like I said, we have guys like Barmore that have sort of like they're right on the cusp of breaking out. Maybe LeBron Ray stays healthy. I just think Alabama could be in for a monster year from a pass rushing standpoint. But I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up today. We do want to ask, we love y'all's feedback, so we do want to ask the viewers, do y'all agree? Do y'all think that these are the 3 guys? Did one stand out to you? Obviously, y'all haven't seen these guys, and y'all can sort of go off the stats we gave. But, we know y'all follow recruiting and y'all like this stuff, and you watch Bones videos. Let us know if you think one of those 3 guys is going to kind of be the freshman pass rusher next year. And then just in a larger sense, are you excited from a pass rushing standpoint? Are you worried with Jennings and Lewis gone? Do y'all think Alabama might be in for a bit of a learning curve or a rough start to the season? Definitely comment and let us know. We look forward to getting that from y'all, and definitely like and subscribe so y'all can keep up with us. We'll be back with another one of these videos tomorrow as we continue our 20 for 20 series. Anyway, thanks for joining us and have a great day.